Since 1968, the Private Education Assistance Committee, or PEAC, trustee of the Fund for Assistance to Private Education, has been an effective partner of government and the private education sector in operationalizing the complementarity between private and public schools towards an integrated Philippine education system that will benefit the Filipino learners. In recognition of the valuable contribution of the private education sector to the country's development, the Fund for Assistance to Private Education, or FAPE, a permanent and irrevocable trust fund for the programs of assistance to private education, was established on November 5, 1968 through Executive Order 156, Series of 1968, which also constituted the PEAC. The PEAC is composed of the Secretary of the Department of Education as the ex officio chair and a representative each from the National Economic Development Authority, Catholic Educational Association of the Philippines, Philippine Association of Colleges and Universities, and Association of Christian Schools, Colleges, and Universities. For the development of private education in the country, the PEAC fulfills its roles as funder, advocate, partner, and enabler. A national secretariat headed by an executive director implements the policies, programs, and initiatives of the PEAC for private education. The PEAC is also present in 16 regions through its regional secretariats. Presidents of credible private educational institutions and associations in the regions are invited by the PEAC to become regional program directors and to host the regional secretariats in their respective institutions. The regional program directors designate regional program coordinators for the day-to-day operations of the regional secretariats. To ensure the growth of FAPE and its other funds, the PEAC constituted an investment advisory group and has engaged external fund managers whose performance is reviewed regularly. The PEAC has also provided assistance to public policy development and advocacy initiatives that support the improvement and sustainability of the private education sector. It worked with the sector for the passage of a landmark piece of legislation that is anchored on the principle of complementarity in the Philippine education system, which the Philippine Constitution has long recognized. In 1989, Republic Act No. 6728, or the Government Assistance to Students and Teachers in Private Education, or GASPE, was legislated. GASPE, which was amended by Republic Act No. 8545 in 1998, institutionalized government assistance to private education in the country. The PEAC was involved in the development of the Education Service Contracting, or ESC, one of the programs identified by the GASPE law, from piloting a scheme which was a precursor to the ESC in 1982 to 1986, to implementing the ESC in 1986 to 1991, and from 1996 up to the present. Given the track record of the PEAC in program management, the Department of Education continues to contract the PEAC to co-implement the ESC, the In-Service Training or INSET, and thereafter the Senior High School Voucher Program when Republic Act 10533 expanded the beneficiaries of DepEd's GASPE program to learners in grades 11 and 12. The PEAC has the following responsibilities in the GASPE program: orientation for participating schools, certification of ESC schools, SHS voucher application, processing of billing statements, monitoring, resolving cases of schools with adverse findings, regular meetings and consultations with stakeholders, research and data gathering, and in-service training for junior high school and senior high school administrators and teachers. The Commission on Higher Education and UNIFAS Board also engaged the PEAC to co-implement the Tertiary Education Subsidy, or TES, program for private higher education institutions in academic year 2019 to 2020. The TES is one of the programs under Republic Act No. 10931, or the Universal Access to Quality Tertiary Education Act. The PEAC is accredited as a continuing professional development provider by the Professional Regulation Commission. Training programs designed and implemented by the PEAC have been awarded CPD credit units by the PRC, which participants can use for the renewal of their professional licenses. It also supports research that will help the private education sector improve educational delivery and its implementation of government subsidy programs at the school level. The efficiency of the PEAC to implement programs on a national scale is further strengthened with its development and management of systems to handle various processes: Enterprise Information System, Information Management System, Voucher Management System, Online Voucher Application Portal, Certification System, Program Monitoring System, Training and Development System, and TES Management System. The PEAC also implements its own programs for the private education sector. The assistance to programs and initiatives to reform education for private educational associations. The research for school improvement towards excellence for private school administrators and teachers writing their thesis and dissertation. The dissemination assistance to research in education for school administrators and faculty members who will present their papers in international conferences abroad. The Leading for Educational Achievement Program for private schools working on their areas for improvement towards PEAC certification. The Rethinking Education Championing and Accelerating School Transformation for private schools making the transition to online learning. The Philippine Education Research Journal for decision makers, policymakers, and practitioners in education, and the Philippine Education Conference and the PEAC Educational Leadership Series, or LIDER, for school leaders and other training programs that address the needs of the sector. Recognizing the efficiency, diversity, and innovativeness of the private schools in achieving quality in Philippine education, the PEAC is committed to promoting private education as an integral part of our education system.
Bayang magiliw, perlas ng silanganan, alab ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, duyan ka ng magiting, sa manlulupig, di ka pasisiil, sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy at sa langit mong bughaw, may dilag ang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang kislap ng watawat mo'y tagumpay na nagniningning, ang bituin at araw niya kailan pa may di magdidilim. Lupa ng araw ng luwalhatit pagsinta, buhay ay langit sa piling mo. Aming ligaya na pag may mga api, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Let us all put ourselves in God's holy presence. Almighty God, we praise and thank you for gathering us all in this webinar today. We pray that you bless abundantly all those who are involved in this webinar. We seek your divine providence that the activities set for this day be successful and fruitful. Allow us to gain invaluable knowledge and learning experiences from this activity. Be with us as we aspire for enlightenment in this time of uncertainty. Help us to continuously seek your wisdoms, guidance, and strength. Inspire us to work tirelessly for the betterment of all those who have placed their trust and confidence in the institutions we are part of. Guide us to always lead and speak with integrity so that our thoughts, words, and actions may reflect what is right, good, and just. Grant us the humility to always seek your will in all that we do and say. Amen.
Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. I am very happy to see all of you online for Leader 3. Ako po si Doris Fernandez Ferrer, the Executive Director of the Private Education Assistance Committee. And for those of you who are not very familiar with the work of the PAC, kami po yung katulong ng Department of Education in the implementation of the ESC, TSS, and the voucher program. Many of you are teachers and principals and school directors, and I know that right now you are in the middle of preparing for school year 21-22 after a very exciting and exacting school year 2020-21. Nagagalak kami na nandito kayo ngayon para makinig dito sa ating programa, which will discuss a very important topic. But I'd like to recall with you that in July of last year, we actually started Leader 1. And in the middle of COVID-19, we were talking about fiscal discipline. We were talking about uncompromising quality. We were talking about future-proofing education. And then we went into discussions of how we should not forget educating the conscience. At that time, with Brother Armin Luistro and Father June Viray. And then in December, we had Leader 2. We thought that because education does not exist in a vacuum, we have to take a look at other issues in Philippine society. And we themed Leader 2 as educating for social transformation in the 21st century. And we had in December a discussion on human rights by Atty. Chel Diokno. We had a discussion on historical revisionism by Professor John Neri. And then pinag-usapan natin ang social media as a force for good with Professor Christian Esguerra, who is also the anchor of After the Fact at ANC. So now we're continuing with that theme, educating for social transformation in the 21st century. And we're very happy to have with us today to discuss the rule of law as a foundation of democracy. One, a person who does not need a lot of introduction, but I'd like to insist on that. And we changed the format a little by having reactors, well-respected educators in the private education space, who will be with us after the main discussant has presented to us his thoughts on our topic this morning. Siyempre, ang gusto talaga nating malaman, bukod sa mga konsepto, dito sa konsepto ng rule of law. We'd like to know how the schools can respond to this by ensuring that they can't deliberately and systematically ensure the promotion of this value of respect for the rule of law. So as our main discussant, I'm very pleased to introduce Dean Tony Viña, who is a leader, a thinker, a teacher, a human rights, environmental and climate justice lawyer, and a social entrepreneur. He is at present the Executive Director of the Manila Observatory and a professor of law, philosophy, and governance in several universities in the Philippines. Currently, he is the vice chair of the Constitutional Law Department of the Philippine Judicial Academy, the former dean of the Atty de Manila University School of Government, co-founder of Ashoka Philippines and the Legal Rights and Natural Resources Center, and a former undersecretary of the Department of Education and Natural Resources of the Philippines. He will be our main discussant, and I cannot overemphasize our pride that he's joining us for today's forum. As reactors, we're equally pleased to have two of our friends in the education sector, working with them very closely, especially at that time when I was still with the Catholic Educational Association of the Philippines. We have Father Ismael Jose I.J. Chan Gonzaga. Ngayon ko lang nalaman na Ismael Jose ang pangalan ni Father I.J., a member of the Society of Jesus and is director for the Jesuits in Cagayan de Oro City. He is currently the director of the Xavier University College Campus Ministries, as well as a professor of Xavier University College of Law, where he teaches agrarian reform, administrative law, labor law, and human rights law. He also teaches legal ethics in the Ateneo de Zamboanga University College of Law and theology and the law in the Ateneo de Manila University Law School. Father I.J. was the executive director of Simbahang Lingkod ng Bayan from 2008 to 2010 and was ordained to the priesthood in 2011. Thereafter, he served as president of the Loyola College of Culion in Palawan until he entered Ateneo de Manila University School of Law in 2012. Father I.J. became a member of the Philippine Bar on September 29, 2017, and he served from November 2017 to March 2020 as consultant to the Migrants and Refugees section of the Holy See, with special attention to Southeast Asia. Father I.J. has a BS degree in legal management and an MA in philosophy, both from Ateneo de Manila, and he obtained his MA in pastoral ministry from the Ateneo, as well as his Bachelor of Sacred Theology, magna cum laude, from LST in 2011, and he got his Juris Doctor degree from Ateneo Law School. Joining Father I.J. is Attorney Ada Abad, who was very close to me at that time, working as the counsel of the Catholic Educational Association of the Philippines. He received her law degree from the UP in 1990 and was a first place recipient of the Sabido Foundation Award for Best Legal Research Paper in the same year, a joint paper together with attorney Evelyn Ursua. She was admitted to the Philippine Bar in 1991, and she obtained her Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science, also from UP Diliman. She was appointed Dean of the Adamson University College of Law in San Marcello Street, Manila in May 2015, and was formerly the Vice Dean of the Lyceum of the Philippines University College of Law in Makati City. Muntik na magagalit si Father Manintim. Adamson University College of Law. She's the legal counsel for the Philippine Association of Colleges and Universities, and I'd like to say hi to the dad, Attorney Tony Abad, the oldest association of private educational institutions of higher learning established in 1932, and from June 2010 to November 2013, she was the counsel of the Catholic Educational Association of the Philippines. She is currently taking up her master's degree in law at the University of the Philippines College of Law, and is also a faculty member of the Lyceum of the Philippines University College of Law, Far Eastern University Institute of Law, and the University of the East teaching labor law review, labor relations law, as well as torts and damages. So there, we will have a full morning. Inaasahan ko po na lahat tayo ay talagang magkakaroon ng maraming mga insights no, ngayong umaga. So I'd like to give the floor now to Dean Tony Viña.
Thank you, Doris, and thank you for that introduction. Thank you for Father IJ and Dean Ada for ahead of time for reacting to this. I gave them just a summary and a little bit of heads up sa PowerPoint that I'm using, but they are they know these issues very well, so I'm sure they will be able to follow uh, uh, what I say and be able to give their own critique. Uh, when I was invited to, sorry, wait, just a minute. When I was invited to do this talk, and this is a busy week, for us in law schools and undergrad also, because I teach undergrad. But although my undergrad has been done for a while, but I'm closing all my schools. I mean, I believe it or not, I experimented with teaching this year, and I ended up teaching 32 courses or 32 classes. I think 15 courses in 12 universities all over the country, many of which are members of PEAC and FAPE, um, and I'm closing the final group of that. Actually, my UST law students in constitutional law and administrative law. I had just finished just an hour ago the final set of oral exams for this group of students. Then I've already checked the written exams, so I just have to submit the grades. Then I'm done for the year. But so it's a very busy time, and I actually said, should I do this? But then I look at the topic, and I thought I can't say no to this topic on democracy and the rule of law, or as phrased, the rule of law and um, as a foundation of democracy. Uh, by themselves, they are important topic. Democracy and rule of law, separate topics. Combined, they are very important topics. It becomes a very important topic as a combination. And in the context of the state of the Philippines today, as we move towards our elections in 2022, as we deal with a pandemic caused by the coronavirus, as we struggle with all sorts of human rights and legal issues around us, I thought that spending time to reflect on these two bedrock principles of the Constitution, bedrock principles of good governance would be worth my time. This is the outline I will follow. I'm doing a sort of a primer way so that it's very clear. I'll start with what is democracy, and particularly discuss what is the authentic democracy, what is the most authentic democracy, both in a philosophical sense, starting with the Greek conception of direct democracy, with Aristotle, and what's the role of a law in that democracy. I also teach philosophy, undergrad philosophy in Ateneo, and actually teach Aristotelian ethics as a starting point for ethical questioning. And all the way to the 1987 Constitution, what is the concept of democracy in the 1987 Constitution? Then I will ask separately also what is the rule of law, and ask ourselves in a more formal setting, what do we mean when we say that there's a rule of law. Then I will go to the connection of both. I mean, and I actually will propose the idea of not just of rule of law, but rule of just law. No? It's an idea I've heard several justices of the Supreme Court express this, that we're not here they're not just there to uphold the rule of law, but they're also to uphold the rule of just law. After all, they're not called legalists, they're called justices. And how that just law is a foundation, in fact, for authentic democracy. I will reflect also in that context to deepen that the role of the judiciary, and given the audience that I think understands philosophical concepts, I will actually propose the concepts of justice of John Rawls and Amartya Sen as good concepts that will guide us if we want to realize just law and authentic democracy in the Philippines. It will also highlight the role rather of educational institutions, of you as educators, as educational leaders of the youth in realizing this combination of just law and authentic democracy. Then I'll go to the facts, to what we are facing in our country today. Ask hard questions about the state of our democracy. Ask hard questions about the state of the rule of just law in the country. Look at scenarios for 2022. This is my initial thinking about 2022. It's non-partisan. I won't be pushing one candidate or another, but just putting out there that these are the choices. But more importantly, that we have to work to have good, honest, COVID-safe elections and campaign. The Ateneo School of Government is leading an effort to get that to happen, and I'll talk about that as well. Then ending with the role of the youth and of educational institutions in achieving the best outcomes for us in this country, where we are truly able to found our democracy, to ground our democracy on the rule of just law. Democracy, I still go by Abraham Lincoln's definition of democracy in Gettysburg, in his address to in Gettysburg's cemetery during the last days of the Civil War of America. It's government by the people, of the people, and for the people. I think the fullest form of democracy involves either direct or representative democracy, where we choose those who lead us, and that includes us leading them, the concept of servant followers. So it's not just they are leaders leading us, but we leading them as well, and doing it for them, for all of us. No? One can start or stay rather at that very formal concept of democracy and say, well, democracy is where either people rule themselves directly, like in a small community or even a family or a barangay, where everyone has a say and everyone, at least all the adults, have an equal say. And whenever we have to make decisions, we just raise our hands and say, oh, this is where I vote, this is what I vote. But in a larger context, and in the Philippine Constitution, we don't have mainly direct democracy. Well, we have both. We have direct democracy. The barangay system is the nearest thing to direct democracy that we have in the local government code. The barangay is actually defined as the basic unit of government where people can participate in governance. And theoretically, in the barangay system, you can just go to the barangay council, the barangay captain. You can participate in decision making. You can participate in implementation of governance decisions. But as we go to a larger scale of municipalities, cities, provinces, country, nation, then we become a Republican democracy, and that's also enshrined in the 1987 Constitution, that our democracy is Republican, meaning to say it's representative. We govern ourselves through our representatives, not directly. So we choose our mayors, we choose our presidents, we choose our council people, and through them we choose our judges, our justices, etc. But by that notion, through voting, to the concept of voting, to the concept of elections, concept of suffrage, where we give everyone the right to vote, and we assure that everyone's vote is counted. I just had this long discussion with my UST administrative law students on the Robredo case. It's also an election law course. I mean, and we were saying that the Robredo Marcos case is actually the best examples of these two principles of everyone has the right to vote, because the Supreme Court refused to nullify elections in Maguindanao just because of allegations of a failed election without any proof. To nullify those elections 5 years after would be a travesty of the principle of the right to vote. And when you count votes and you count it faithfully as they did with the pilot provinces that was chosen by the protestee Marcos, then that's also the right of the voters for their will to be properly counted, to be properly treated. And that's what Republican democracy is supposed to assure. As long as people voted properly, as long as everyone was allowed to vote, as long as those votes are counted properly, then we are a democratic state, even if whatever our representatives do, even if you don't like it, we have to abide by it because we vote them. And the way to counter that, if you don't like them, is to vote them out of office in the next election. So the elections are very important in a Republican Republican democracy. But authentic democracy shouldn't stop there. And the 1987 Constitution, that is actually quite clear. Authentic democracy involves also people participation in legislation, in policy making, and even in implementation of government programs. You find that in Article 2, for example, of the Constitution, the state policies where people's organizations are recognized. And you also find that, I think, also in Article 13. You would have various laws that recognize that. We have provisions on initiative and referendum in the Constitution and also in legislation. Unfortunately, to be honest, Congress has done a very bad job of implementing that, and I think the Supreme Court, unfortunately, has also interpreted that in a very, very strict way, that initiative and referendum is practically useless in the Philippines, unlike in many other states in the US, in Europe, in Italy. I once lived in Italy, and it fascinated me that twice a year there will be 20 to 30 initiatives where people can directly propose new laws to the people without avoiding or without having to go through its parliament. But unfortunately, our Congress are very zealous about their authority to legislate and does not want to share it with the people. And unfortunately, the Supreme Court also has interpreted that, especially in Lambino versus Comelec, as a way to avert, this is where bad cases happen when there are bad situations. There was a perception that President Arroyo wanted a shift to parliamentary elections so she could stay in power, and essentially the Supreme Court stopped her with that. But in that sense, sacrificing initiative and referendum, which should be very easy, should be easy to do if you want authentic democracy. But we do have in the Philippines considerable people participation in implementation of government programs. Some administrations are better than that. In the Aquino administration, for example, that's President Aquino's administration, and I would say the Fidel V. Ramos administration. Those two administrations were very good in getting people's organizations and non-government organizations in participating in implementing government programs. But by and large, I would say that you have that in most of our administrations through the years. But for me, authentic democracy is democracy where your representative systems, your electoral system is good, unquestionable, transparent, reflects the will of the people, allows everyone to vote, and your people's organizations and communities and individuals are able to participate in governance, including, for example, educational institutions should be able to have a say in the regulations that regulate you, that affect you. That includes stakeholder engagement, consultations, etc. Let me go now to rule of law, and as I said, I'll start with my favorite Greek philosopher, ethics philosopher, at least Aristotle. Law is order, and good law is good order. He says that in the Nicomachean Ethics, where he talks about the role of ethics in society. He basically says that all human beings are ethical beings by nature. Ethics is the foundation of politics, or politics is really nothing but the extension of ethics. Being lawful and being just are virtues that we want to nurture in individuals and in society. And so Aristotle would not be able to imagine a situation where there is no law, there's no rule of law. There's a recognition that rule of law is imperfect. If you know Greek philosophy and have read the early dialogues of Plato, you will see that question of, is there a just law? Makatarungan ba palagi yung batas? Is law always just, or can law be unjust? You will see that is asked already by Socrates, in the way Socrates was tried and killed. And had a chance to escape, but he actually said, I won't escape. I will drink the hemlock of poison, because if I escape, that is a violation of the rule of law, and the rule of law is more important than my personal liberty, than my personal faith. On the other hand, he does recognize that his being sentenced to death by Athens was unjust. So the question of, can there be an unjust law, was already asked, and yes, there can be an unjust law. And we need to also be aware of that. More contemporary, I have these quotations from Barack Obama and Margaret Thatcher, both of which frame the extreme importance of the rule of law, or the importance of the rule of law even in extreme situations, which is that even in the midst of emergencies and passions, even in the midst of the hardest, the most difficult challenge society faces. For example, if you think the war against drugs that President Duterte launched in 2016 was absolutely necessary because drugs was out of control at that point, that still doesn't excuse setting aside the rule of law, even if in fact it's very important. And I would push you also that because if Duterte, President Duterte launched the war against drugs, President Aquino launched the war against corruption. And also, I would say, violated human rights, at least of some people. Of course, at least not in the tens of thousands that might have been violated in the war against drugs. But I would say with certainty that President Arroyo's rights were completely violated by the Aquino administration. Nobody should be detained for 5 years and then be acquitted after that on the murder. On the murder, meaning to say she didn't even have to prove anything because the charges against her were really very, very weak and there was no evidence against her. So even in a big problem like corruption, you have to have rule of law. Margaret Thatcher also has that good point in when she was prime minister, right? It's not enough to be democratic. It's not enough that the majority decides to do something. In order to be considered truly free, and I would say authentically democratic, in order to be considered that, I would say, that countries, I'm quoting from her, countries must also have a deep love of liberty and an abiding respect for the rule of law. In my constitutional law classes and in my philosophy of law classes, I actually begin with a Greek play the Antigone, which is about ethics versus law, legal versus ethical. But I also have I also do another play as part of my initial material for my students to read. An Enemy of the People by Henrik Ibsen. It's a very beautiful play in the 19th century. It's about sustainable development 100 years ago. So very interesting for me as an environmental lawyer. But in that play, the majority of the people in a town refused to accept that their town was polluted, that the water system of their town was polluted. Refused to accept. The mayor refused to accept. The newspapers refused to accept. The businessmen refused to accept. And all the ordinary people refused to accept. Only one person, supported by his family, spoke truth to power. That the water in our town is polluted and we should not be inviting people to come to this. It was a tourist town. It's like Boracay. In that case, it was a town where people actually went to for its hot springs that was piped into swimming pools. Mga ganong klaseng hot springs, mga resort towns like that. There's a lot of that in Europe. But it was dirty, it was polluted by a factory, a leather factory. And the classic quotation from an Enemy of the People is when Dr. Stackman, the main character there, says, the majority is always wrong. The majority is always wrong. He was saying there that because the majority can be manipulated, even free votes actually are not free. And the play shows how the newspapers were worried about their circulation, the mayor was worried about the income of the town, everyone was worried for themselves. And that's why they were all being manipulated. And the people were ready to be manipulated, wanted to be manipulated. But there, of course, I will not go to the extent that the majority is always wrong. But I think it's fair to say that the majority can be mistaken in a democracy. And that's why the rule of law is very important. To what extent can then a just law or a rule of just law be the basis of an authentic democracy? And here I will reflect on two ideas. Now, one is good procedures are valuable in themselves. Very important to recognize that when the procedures are good, they're transparent, judges are independent, people are all heard, there's a basis for every decision. There's basics of good due process that our Supreme Court and Supreme Courts all over the world have repeated again and again. I mean, and that's valuable in themselves. But in the context of democracy, good procedures are not enough. Good outcomes are also critical. In other words, the good procedures will only be as valuable when the outcomes it produces are good for the people. And in the Philippines, I have to say that the good outcomes must be in the context of, are we successfully overcoming poverty, inequality? Are we achieving social justice? Is human rights at the center of our legal system? As I said, I've heard that several times. Justice Leon particularly, but other justices have said that too in oral arguments. Pag nagmeno ng legalistic, procedural na lang ng procedural. Although I have to say, the Supreme Court is really mixed about this. And later on, when I look at the state of law in the Philippines, I have to say it's just a mixed feeling about the Supreme Court. Because, but in this context, I have heard justices say that we are not legalists. Diba? When there's a legal argument, the retort is, hindi kami tinatawag legalist dito, tinatawag kami justices. Kasi we're supposed to give justice and deliver justice. Let me divert a little bit to the judiciary as an example lang of how the judiciary and how the law also needs to be producing just outcomes and not just following just procedures. For sure, judges, this is actually a lecture I give to all our judges and as a basic lecture I give at the Philippine Judicial Academy. We expect our judges to be impartial. No? I mean, it's an indispensable imperative of due process. They must not only be impartial, but also appear to be impartial. So that there's assurance to the parties that decisions will be judged. Now, so for example, you are a prosecutor, you should not be hearing a case. If you're a judge that was a former prosecutor, you should not be hearing a case which you prosecuted because that doesn't really give confidence on the people that are now being prosecuted and now you are being judged. No, there cannot be an equal justice. There's a quotation in Nelson versus People from Justice Frankfurter. There cannot be equal justice where a court is already committed to the other party with a judgment already made and waiting only to be formalized, and the hearing is just a charade. No, it doesn't mean, however, and I borrow from the United Nations principles on the independence of judiciary here, while judges shall decide matters impartially, basis of facts and law and no restrictions, it doesn't, however, mean that judges do not have freedom of expression or right to association and assembly, as long as they conduct themselves in a manner that is dignified and a manner that is impartial. That's why you have to avoid even the appearance of conflict of interest. We have that. All of these are reflected in our canons of law. I mean, our canons of the judiciary of judicial ethics. I won't have to repeat that. For example, judges can have political views, but they cannot, be partisan in their politics. So no question about that for concrete cases. However, in their approach to interpret the law, is the magsaysay credo, the poor having less in life, more in law, is that legal? Is that constitutionally founded? And my answer is yes, it is in the Constitution. Not the exact words, the jurisprudence has quoted this many times, but in the way many provisions of the Constitution has been framed. No? So in Article 2, for example, you have several provisions, anti-poverty provisions, social justice provisions, sectoral provisions, youth, women, health, environment, labor, private sector, indigenous peoples, community-based organizations. There's one full article on social justice, Article 13. And then very specific provisions on labor, agrarian reform, subsistence fishermen, urban land reform, people with disabilities, women, small-scale utilization of natural resources, ancestral lands. So we have these constitutional imperatives that actually mandate not just the judiciary, but the government and our institutions, our democratic institutions, to say that the poor have a priority in our constitutional order, and that our system should be judged on whether the poor have access to justice. And the answer to the question, does the poor in the Philippines have access to justice? And the answer, frankly, has to be no. And before I go to that, I just want to then share my thoughts of what access to justice is. Because this is the kind of justice we need as a foundation of democracy. I borrow from John Rawls the concept of justice as fairness, where we remove our veil of ignorance, or we put on our veil of ignorance so that justice is like the lady justice that's blindfolded. But Rawls develops further in his philosophy of justice the importance of making sure that those who have positioned less have a better chance to acquire justice. There's this long quotation that I use a lot in my philo of law classes to have a vision of a just society where you favor those that have no access to justice. I start with the second sentence. Each person possesses an inviolability founded on justice that even the welfare of society as a whole cannot override. For this reason, justice denies that the loss of freedom for some is made right by a greater good shared by others. It does not allow that the sacrifices imposed on a few are outweighed by the larger sum of advantages enjoyed by many. Therefore, in a just society, the liberties of equal citizenship are taken as settled. The rights secured by justice are not subject to political bargaining or to the calculus of social interest. In other words, all of us must be assured of minimum rights, minimum access to justice. I like even better Amartya Sen's concept of justice as something imperfect, but something we always strive to become better at. Rawls is more formal, more idealistic. Everyone is treated properly, rightly, fairly. Sen recognizes that that might never be the case. And what we need to do is to move and strive forward always to go to the less and just. And that's why he starts with the material conditions. And the material conditions we now have in the Philippines, and I say all parts of the world, is that of injustice. And the goal is to build the capability of everyone, and especially the poor and the marginalized and the unjustly treated, to achieve justice. So access to justice is not a golden, reward, a ball, a golden rainbow at the end of a long journey. It is a journey that you continually strive to do in a society by giving people more and more capacity to achieve justice. And that, I think, is the role of educational institutions in our society. To help us expose the lack of rule of law and the fact that we're very far from an authentic democracy, and to show the way and to build capability, especially with the poor, the weakest, the marginalized, so that they're able to work for just conditions for them or less unjust conditions for them. So let me end with my own assessments of the state of our democracy and the state of the rule of law, and combine together, I think, I do not exaggerate when I say we are not in good shape, and there is in fact a lot of work to do. in terms of our democracy. There's an inherent weakness of our system. Regardless of who the president is, our constitutional system establishes a very strong presidency. When I teach Constitutional Law 1, the first semester of Constitutional Law of first-year law students, I teach that in UP, in PUP, taught that before in LaSalle, I teach that in UST. I always give a lecture on the roots of our presidency. People make a mistake and say that our president is like the American president. No. Our presidency comes from the Spanish Governor General, the institution of the Spanish Governor General, which was a dictatorial office, followed by the American Military Governor General, which was also a dictatorial office, followed by the American Civil Governor General, which was partially, because we became at that point a formal democracy, voting, the senators, assemblyman, later congressman, partially a dictatorial office. And when we promulgated the 1935 Constitution and the 1973 Constitution, and inexplicably, I have to say inexplicably, because we just came from martial law, but the 1987 Constitution kept the same dictatorial tendencies in our presidency. What am I saying? I'm saying is, if you have a president who wants to be the dictator, he can do it under our system very easily. Legally, it might be challenging. There are constraints, there are restraints, but because he controls the budget, absolute power on appointment, martial law powers, commander-in-chief powers, all of that combined together, a president who wants to be a dictator can be a dictator. And so I think we are a situation where we have authoritarianism on the rise, justified by supposed national goals. Certainly we had, in the 1935 and 70 Constitution, we had Marcos that seized these tendencies. And then today, I think we see that in actions when the president say, for example, I don't care what Congress will do. So Supreme Court, do not issue a TRO against me. You should not be doing that in a democracy. But our president does that, and our president can act in accordance with that. Impeachment is supposed to be a very transparent process. The president should be allowing a political process to follow, but both Aquino and President Noynoy Aquino and President Duterte use impeachment against people they perceive to be against their agenda. And they could do it. They could do it because, in effect, through the power of the budget, they can influence Congress on what to do. So these are all inherent in our Constitution. What is not inherent in our Constitution, which we tried to, at least the framers tried to stop but did not stop it enough, is dynastic control of our political institutions, our elective offices. And that's where we're heading. We're heading to a likely daughter, father, president, vice president. Just the possibility of that is mind-boggling, right? But that is not impossible. That is more likely than not likely, in my view. It all depends on whether Sara Duterte, is strong enough. So far, she says she will not run if the father is the vice president, but we don't know what will happen. But the country is moving towards full dynastic control. You already see that at the local level. And they always say that and there's some truth to that, that's the fruit of term limits. Because with term limits, people could not stay forever in their favorite positions. So they move around, do different cycles, and then have their relatives. They also realize that they allow someone else to run, they will not be able to get back to their old positions. The weakness of the opposition is something we are facing. Or in other words, because of the way our politics have developed, there's really very little opposition that we have, because most politicians will go with whoever is on power. Red tagging. I've never seen the extreme red tagging that we are seeing in these days. Without any basis, without any intelligence, to be honest. I kind of know my ideological politics, and it just surprises me how the names they would red tag, out of the blue, actually. I mean, they've red tagged me, and I teach in the National Defense College of the Philippines. Yesterday, I just talked to 800 policemen, right? In the National Police Academy. I have many generals and colonels that I mentor, but they still red tag me. The NTF-LCAC still does that. The attacks on media, and that comes from different fronts, as you know, from the government, through libel attacks, for example, through libel lawsuits, as well as through fake news and alternative sources of views, right, through social media. I don't have to go a lot to that because I want to finish in a couple of minutes. This I want to repeat. It's something we've heard all before, but it's really true. And for you, education institutions, you've experienced this as well in the issues that you care about. For example, in taxes. No? When the rule of law and when democracy is not, the rules of democracy are not followed, everyone is vulnerable. To be honest, as a lawyer, and my colleagues here know that, I've decided that, for example, my two main clients now as lawyers are the LUMAD schools, the LUMAD Backwit schools, and the LUMAD schools all over the country, because they're the most red tagged, the most harassed, the most attacked, and the most vulnerable. And if I can help them and push that back, that's helping everyone else like them that will be and that can be attacked, and that has been attacked. And youth activists, because they too are the most, Sara Elago, I'm a lawyer for, have been charged like 20 times for kidnapping. We win it all the time. And also the LUMAD schools, we win all our cases all the time. Wala namang basis for any of this. But the harassment, the cost, well, in my case, I don't get paid for it. And I've actually hired a big team to help them, subsidizing it with other things that we do. But they start with the weakest links, like the war against drug. They started with the poorest. And what we have to do for those of us who are farther down the line is we have to go to the front. The church has to go to the front. Educational institutions to protect, for example, your students, even when they are against you. I think that's very important, because if you don't go to the front of them and they fall, all of us are going to fall. First they came for the socialists and we did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for trade unionists, did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Came for the Jews, I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, no one left to speak for me. That literally is happening today. That literally happened in the war against drugs. And I'll talk about that as my last point about the state of the rule of just law. And here it's mixed. The Supreme Court has come up with really very good decisions on human rights, People versus SAPLA, for example. But on the other hand, has uphold the president's powers. Sorry, that's not that's a typo. Martial law cases. The contradictions in the Philippines is reflected in the case now in the International Criminal Court, where there's a finding by the prosecutor that crimes against humanity has been committed in the Philippines, most likely as a government policy and government sanction. So the one remaining obstacle for a case to be filed against who are responsible for both the killings and for not stopping the killings. Those are the two things that the government is being held responsible for the killings themselves, because there's evidence to show that the killings are sanctioned and is part of government policy, and also for not stopping the killings, because in crimes against humanity, the responsibility is to not do them and to stop them on part of the government. But the one remaining thing is complementarity, and I think that is what will be decided by the pretrial chamber to proceed with the case, whether or not the legal system in the Philippines can hold accountable the people that will be that can be charged for crimes against humanity. And that is a difficult question for a lawyer like me. It's a difficult question because we have a functioning judiciary, but also in some cases they don't function, right? So it's a mix experience. The DOJ is a good example of that. To be honest, I would praise the DOJ in certain cases. For example, as I said, we've always won the cases against youth activists. Kabataan Party List, Anak Bayan, Sara Elago herself as the leader of Kabataan, the rep, has been charged all the way to the Supreme Court with kidnapping, with what do you call this, trafficking of youth, abuse of children. Kasi the theory is being, if you make a child an activist, especially an underage below 18, right, then you're guilty of all of that. But all the time, that has been dismissed. Dami-dami na naman kaso, all the time dismissed. There is absolutely no basis for the charge, both legally and factually. They also charge her for recruitment. There's absolutely no basis for that, no factual basis for that. Recruitment to the NPA, child warriors, etc. The same with the Lumad schools. We've won every single case there. The latest one is the one in Cebu when they raided University of San Carlos illegally. And all the charges were dismissed a month or so ago. So they're good. But in the Dilima case, you know, the Department of Justice has, in my view, closed its eyes on the facts because of its political nature. You are using politics. Here you use law to undermine democracy. We call it lawfare. And we've seen that again and again. And I will also say this is not just the Duterte administration. It does happen in other administrations as well, when law is misused against political enemies and law is selectively used against political enemies. And I think that is when democracy becomes diminished. Or the converse is that if there's a rule of just law, then democracy would be improved and enhanced. So my last point is that I may sound bleak, but I'm not. I'm actually very hopeful. I give this talk, a version of this talk to a lot of religious congregations nowadays. That's a cycle. Every when Duterte first became president, I did around maybe 10 religious congregations and the superiors of religious women and men to give them this overall picture of where we are. In the 2019 elections, and now again, I'm glad people are doing it earlier, a year before, so that people have a possible framing of elections. I mean, so, but I'm not going to give you that whole thing. I'm just going to give you a few points that are important for our topic, because I think that the crossroads is we're faced with a crossroads in both democracy and the rule of law, where the interaction can even get worse. We have a bad state of democracy, a bad state of the rule of law, at least a mixed state of the rule of law, That's a volatile combination, but we have the chance in the elections of 2022 to change course. Of course, there's a COVID situation that is going to be the elephant in the room for 2022, both in the campaign, the manner we campaign, the manner we vote, it has to be safe, but also because as an issue, you know, will we get to herd immunity by March of 2022? And therefore, the administration or the coalition supporting the administration can have a victory lap and benefit politically from that. You have the human rights situation that could worsen. Pending now is the anti-terror law petition. I will not comment on that because I'm one of the petitioners, lawyers of petitioners there for indigenous peoples and the Moros. The economic situation in the Philippines is bad, worse than many other countries, it seems, especially of Southeast Asia, from the figures that I've seen and the analysis that I've seen. Ongoing climate and other environmental challenges, very big challenges coming to us, and you know, or natural disasters like Taal. How long will that situation persist? Then, of course, you have the different groups that are now positioning themselves. No? Within the Duterte coalition, it seems like Senator Pacquiao is bent on running and willing to spend the money for it and putting up his own political party and his own political forces with it. It is not clear to me up to now what the opposition would look like. My analysis is that they're actually waiting probably for VP Robredo, who's very sensible. I think VP Robredo will only run if he sees that she has a fair chance of winning. And if she does not, she will rather have someone who has a better chance to win. That's how I see her caution, not as someone who's afraid to run, but someone who's very sensible. And there are other options as well in the opposition, we'll see. So right now, that's not my priority. I think the priority right now is to make sure that we have a COVID-free elections. And that is where I think the youth and especially educational leaders and institutions have a role to play. No? In my scenarios, in my political scenarios, I always say the choice is backward, forward again, or forward. And the key groups really are actually the youth, women, indigenous peoples, leaders, our leaders, and in your case, educational leaders and institutions, on how you will strengthen the understanding as well as offer institutions to organize, not partisan because you cannot do that, but allow to be a bridge to political action, is my view, if you want to strengthen democracy and achieve the rule of law in the Philippines. So with that, I end my talk, and thank you for your patience.
Maraming salamat din, Viña. Mamaya may question and answer tayo, no? Pero I'm sure marami ng mga tanong, especially because ano yung narinig natin, mind-boggling where we are right now, but hopeful. Okay, so we'd like to go to the our reactors first, and then yung mga tanong natin pwedeng sagutin, no, ng ating main discussant and our reactor. So Father IJ first, and then Dean Ada.
Good morning, Ma'am Doris. Morning din, Tony. Una sa lahat po, maraming salamat and magandang umaga po sa lahat. Din, Tony, thank you for that very instructive talk. Naisip ko nga talaga there's a tendency to be impatient with law and democracy. But law is about patience. It is about process. May isang linya sa isang kanta na sinulat ni Noel Cabangon na paborito ko, yung Pinoy Manalig Ka, at may linya doon na nakasulat ay, hindi madali magbuo ng bayan. Hindi nga. Law is fundamental in every civilization. Law is what puts order If bent or not followed, anarchy ensues. At lalo na kung ang mga institusyon mismo na dapat nagpapatupad ng batas o inaasahan magpatupad ng batas sa siya pang nagsasangtabi nito, ano na lang ang aasahan natin? Kaya nga magandang sinabi ni Dean Tony quoting John Rawls, "Justice denies that the loss of freedom for some is made right by a greater good shared by others. It does not allow that the sacrifices imposed on a few are outweighed with a larger sum of advantages enjoyed by many." Similarly so, the rule of law ay ang ating kapasidad sana rin upang respetuhin at tamang ipatupad ang katarungan para sa lipunan, para sa lahat. At ang pagpapatupad ng batas ay dapat tinutupad ng walang kiling. A law implemented arbitrarily is what leads to breaking down of so many sensitive points in society, not just legal. Let me be more personal. Mga guro ang karamihan sa atin. And that is why I'm very privileged na naririto bilang isang anak ng guro. Isang guro na nagsilbi sa kanyang bayan bilang public school teacher for 38 years hanggang sa kanyang retirement, ang mahal kong nanay. At hanggang ngayon, dala-dala ko ang tanging niyang habilin sa akin sa buhay. IJ, always be consistent. Makikita natin gaano kahalaga ang payong iyan sa buhay guro. Kapag hindi natin napatutupad ng tama o wasto ang mga patakaran, anong klaseng graduates ang mga susunod na lilingkod sa bayan? Or ang mga estudyanteng hindi marunong sumunod sa ordinaryong mga patakaran sa eskwelahan, dadalhin yan hanggang sa pagtrabaho at sa mas malawak na buhay. But we need to understand the complexity of the problem. Why do students come to school with such attitude? Lalo na ang medyo problematic. Kasi karamihan, bit-bit ang bagahe ng tahanan. Ngayon pa, ang daming helicopter parents na konting galaw lang nating mga guro, social media na kaagad ng walang kontrol. Tumatapang rin ang bata dahil rin sa ugali ng magulang. Bakit ko binibigay ito bilang halimbawa? Sapagkat po ganun din sa malaking lipunan. Tumatapang ang mga taong umaabuso dahil nakikita rin kung paano sila hinahayaan o pinapangunuhan pa nga sa pag-aabuso ng mga nasa taas. Respeto ang tanging nating sinisigaw at pinupukpok sa isipan ng ating mga mag-aaral. Ngunit kung ang mismong mga nasa posisyon o nakatatanda ay walang modo at hindi tumutupad, bakit ba naman paniniwalaan ng bata? I begin my reaction to Dean Tony's talk from this context because I also want you to understand my own bias and where I am coming from. As an educator, as a son of educators, and coming from a family of educators. I am political, but I am not colored. I grew up in Tacloban, Leyte. I was there 3 days after Yolanda para hanapin ang nanay ng papa ko, ang lola ko. I had friends and relatives among the dead. Those of you who are from Leyte or have experienced the tragedies of the past 10 years will understand how I can say I have no political color. Sinasabi ko ito bilang konteksto ko para sa aking tatlong maikling punto sa binahagi ni Dean Tony. Una, rule of law must be set and implemented properly in order for democratic institutions to seriously work well. If enforcement is arbitrary, then institutions collapse. Medyo nabanggit ko na po ito. Napakahalaga ng pagpapatupad ng batas kung nais nating umunlad. At pag sinabing batas, kailangan nating maunawaan at ma-appreciate na hindi lang ang pagpapatupad nito ang mahalaga, kundi pati ang mismong disposisyon ng tao. Naalala ko noon, ewan ko na ngayon, pero tingnan na lang natin, road manners natin sa kalsada ng Pinoy hanep talaga. Grabe tayo unahan sa kanto, walang bigayan, singitan, siksikan. Ngunit pag pumunta ka ng Subic, ang babait. Sunod sa rules ng trapiko, nagkakahiyaan pa nga. Ikaw ba naman, i-fine ka ng $100 kada infraction. But sa totoo lang, hindi ang $100 na fine ang nagpapabait sa drivers. Kung hindi, it was knowing that they could not wiggle out their way out of it. Pag nahuli, no discussions, no pakiusap, walang padulas. We have solid laws, but too often people get away because they know they can wiggle their way out of it. Ang tunay na demokrasya ay gagana lamang kung ang mamamayan ay mabigyan ng kapasidad na panindigan kung ano ang nararapat. Ang sumunod sa batas at siguraduhin na tama ang pagpapatupad ng batas. Kasi ang isang mangtutupad or enforcer ay pwedeng maakit sa mga padulas kung hinahayaan lang siya o pinagbibigyan o nakikita niyang ginagawa ng mga nasa taas. And worse, paglalo pa nating tinutukso. Hopefully, democracy works and allows for people to give importance to the common good and from there allow for what is essential to emerge. Without mature democracy, the dictates of a few shall control the many. Pangalawa po, sabi nga ni Dean Tony quoting Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, being democratic is not enough. A majority cannot turn what is wrong into right. In order to consider truly free, countries must also have a deep love of liberty and abiding respect for the rule of law. For democracy to work, the legal system in place has to be set and appreciated by all, if not then most. Not to appreciate the system is to attract the possibilities of non-commitants and not following. The government must be appreciated by the populace in order for the set to work. Democracy matures in a populace that sees its relevance, its importance. A populace that does not feel the difference will never commit. Kailangan maangkin ng bawat Pilipino ang kanyang pagiging Pilipino. Kasama rito ang malasakit na mas mahalaga ang kabutihan ng lipunan lampas sa sarili. Ngunit paano maangkin ang demokrasya ng isang mamamayang balisang-balisa para lang makahanap ng pagkain para sa kanyang mga mahal sa buhay? Paano maangkin ng isang mahirap na mamayan ang pagmamahal sa bayan kung nakikita niya ang kabulastugan ng mapinuno at yaong mga dapat nagpapatupad ng katarungan? Kasagutan dito para sa akin, ay ang paninindigan dapat ng ating mga democratic institutions. And again, to be honest, the educational institution is still the most important. For we are the ones forging the hearts and minds of those who will lead and move this country forward. May pananagutan tayo maipakita sa lahat ang halaga ng pagmamahal sa bayan. Democracy works best when people are informed, when they are empowered. Democracy works best when the different institutions, government and civic, are mature enough to deliver the proper services. Finally, last point, Dean Tony quoted former US President Barack Obama saying, one of the challenges of a democratic government is making sure that even in the midst of emergencies and passions, we make sure the rule of law and the basic precepts of justice and liberty prevail. Babalikan ko po ang una kong pagninilay nga na oo, kay hirap bumuo ng bayan. Pwede tayong mainip at matuksong i-shortcut lahat. Ngunit pag shortcut natin, mas lalo nating nasisira ang halaga ng proseso na siya ring protection natin laban sa arbitrariness na pwedeng laruin ng mga nasa posisyon. We'll say maybe strengthen the enforcement agencies? But how? What happened in the first place? To be completely honest, I do not have the answers. It is hurting to know that our own generation also lost its chance. Politics have become something of a circus. We have lost statesmen. Gone are the days that the debate on the floor of Congress revolved around principles and what should be for the common good. Debates nowadays are railroaded simply by block voting of admin allies without even the benefit of hearing each other's side. Congressional votes are no longer about discussions of better points, but rather of whose allegiance has who. That is not maturity at all. And until then, my prayer, I pray we go back to some certain sense of idealism. The integrity lost when martial law bastardized the service, made public service a money-making endeavor instead of a vocation. Let us go back to accountability, ang pananagutan sa kapwa. To end, this is not a popular view when I'm praying that I'm wrong. Baka unang kailangan rin aminin ng marami sa atin. Hindi natin mahal ang bayan. O dahil wala tayong totoong konsepto ng bayan. Maybe we do not love our country yet enough. Maraming kadahilanan na kailangan nating harapin bilang kapwa mamamayan. Na sana bilang angking pagiging Pilipino. Ngunit sabi nga ni Dean Tony, tayo ay we will end on a happy and hopeful note. At naniniwala rin ako na balang araw babangon tayo bilang Pilipinas. Darating din tayo doon. Kailangan ng pasensya sa proseso. Hindi madali mabuo ng bayan. Pero darating tayo doon. Mahal kong Pilipinas. Maraming salamat po sa lahat.
Hello? Can I start? Oh, okay. May I share my slides, please? Can you please confirm if you see my slides? Okay, thank you. Okay, maraming salamat sa inyong lahat. Magandang umaga po. Ako po si Ada. Inutusan po ako ni Ma'am Doris na mag-react po kay Dean Tony at saka kay Father Attorney IJ. So, you know, Dean Tony gave us a very comprehensive overview of the legal and philosophical basis of the concepts of democracy and the rule of law. And he tied it up with the present day issues. So thank you, Dean Tony, for that very exhaustive discussion. And then Father IJ gave us a very deep and thoughtful reaction to the talk of Dean Tony. Maraming kaming common points, no? Malalim yung mga sinasabi ni Father IJ, and I tend to agree with a lot of it. Now, on my part, I'm just, you know, nung nag-uusap kami bago itong meeting na to, no, yung sabi ko, sige, I will just try to break down the concepts into practical aspects as it affects our daily lives, no? So, with your permission, I'm like to tell you of this rule of law and democracy. So there are three essential things to an ideal state. I want you to just remember three concepts. First concept, which Dean Tony already talked about, is democracy. Plus good governance, which he also discussed earlier. What is good governance? So these are the several aspects of good governance, and one of which, and essential of which, is following the rule of law. Okay, so if you have all of these three concepts, then that becomes the ideal state. No, now the rule of law, democracy, and good governance are very much interrelated, and they are key elements for the existence of an ideal state. So the framework of the rule of law serves as the foundation for a democratic society. Now, nung nagre-research ako, sabi ko, how do I explain it ba, this rule of law? And I was trying to imagine it, explaining the rule of law to my pamangkins, no? And so I was trying to research, and then I came across itong ang paragraph doon sa briefer na binigay ni Director Doris sa amin, ni Dr. Doris. Sabing ganyan, according to the United Nations, the rule of law is a principle of governance in which all persons are accountable to laws that are publicly promulgated, equally enforced, and independently adjudicated. And when I further research, it says there, the World Justice Project has articulated 4 universal ROL principles. So ito yung pinaka-basic daw niya. Number 1, the government and the officials, as well as the citizens as individuals and entities, are accountable, made accountable under the law. Second, the laws are clear, publicized, stable, just, and applied evenly, and they protect our fundamental rights. The process, number 3, the process by which the laws are enacted is accessible, fair, and efficient. And lastly, that justice is delivered timely by competent, ethical, and independent representatives. Okay? So, the question now is, naitanong ko tuloy sarili ko, parang may nagtanong, ito ba ay para lang sa mga huwes at saka sa mga abogado? Na hindi naman po. Because everyday issues of safety, of rights, of justice and governance affects all of us. Everyone is a stakeholder in the rule of law. Now, how does the rule of law affect us as individual persons? Now, the rule of law kasi defines how we should act, how we should conduct ourselves in a society. So the rule of law provides us with the boundaries with which we can legally act and behave. So it also dictates how the society and government should conduct its business so as to promote consistency, reliability, fairness, equity, and protection for every citizen. No? So, next question therefore, paano ngayon kung wala yung rule of law? Kasi I tend to think of it in terms of, what if there was no rule of law naman? Just to emphasize how important it is. Imagine if there was no rule of law, then there will be chaos, there will be anarchy. Bakit? Because people can now do whatever they want without respecting the rights of others. There is no fear of consequences because there are no laws that are required to be followed. Meaning to say there might be laws, but because they're not strictly enforced, then we just don't mind the laws anymore. So can you imagine that kind of a state? Para tayong wild, wild west. So imagine na lang natin din in terms of economics, yung impact as a person. If you want to put up a corporation, you want to build a building for investment purposes lang, would you still want to invest your money if there were too many obstacles in putting up that corporation? Na para lang kumuha ng application or ng permit, no? Para lang i-process yung permit, kailangan may kausap ka pa sa loob at maglalagay ka. Paano kung yung tatayuan mo na building pala, malaman-laman mo, 3 yung titulo? So the property rights are not defined. Would you still want to invest? Would you still want to put in a business? If you know that the contracts that you enter into, kahit pumirma ka dyan, pwede palang isabaliwala. No? And even then, you also know that there are uneven enforcement of regulations. Pwedeng lumusot, pwedeng hindi. Bakit yung isa nakalusot, itong tayo hindi? Nakakawalang gana, di ba? So gusto mo pa ba mag-invest? So that would be, the effect of if there was no rule of law. Now, even in public health and environment, I read about this. When the rule of law is weak, the medicines fail to reach the health facilities. And even if they were to reach the health facilities, in all probability, the prices would have been jacked up. Diba? Effective rule of law reduces corruption. It improves public health. Sabi nga nila. So, it is said that the strengthening of the rule of law is a major goal of governments, of donors, of businesses, and of civil organizations around the world. So the rule of law, therefore, is fundamental to these things, no? You want international peace and security, political stability, you want economic, social progress and development, you want the protection of people's rights and fundamental freedoms, access to public services, rule of law is fundamental to curbing corruption, restraining the abuse of powers by the people in the government, as well as you want to establish the social contract between the people and the state. You want to be able to, have the state protect your rights. So, if we say that this is a major goal of governments, I was wondering, sabi ko, okay, that's the rule of law. How do we compare kaya with other countries? So in my research 2 nights ago, I read about this. Sabi niya, oh, sabi ko, nag-type ako sa Google, rule of law. So yun na yung mga research na. And then I typed rule of law Philippines. And the first thing I saw was this article. Sabi dito, uy, Philippines rule of law scores dips further. Sabi ko, anong score? So I tried to read. And then I found out, there is such a thing as a World Justice Project pala. And this one is an independent multidisciplinary organization working to advance the rule of law around the world. No? And apparently in this survey, there were at least 130 countries all over the world where they made the survey and then find out, how is the rule of law in this country? And this will help, people in deciding where to live, where to invest, etc., etc. So, tiningnan ko tuloy, ang dami na pala nilang survey every year. Okay? So, I got the latest survey, Rule of Law Index 2020. And I went back. Sabi ko, 2020, ano na ba nangyari? So, dito, tiningnan ko yung Pilipinas. Doon sa 2015 Rule of Law Index, ang sabi dito, global ranking natin, 51 out of 102. And then, 2016 to 2017, 2018, from 51, naging 70, naging 88. Pagdating ng 2020, ito na, 91 na tayo. Bakit bumababa? Siguro naman na alam na natin kung bakit bumababa, no? Kasi the perception is that we have not been able to comply with our obligations under the rule of law. Okay? So it says here, ito nga, lumabas dito sa dyaryo. Philippine Rule of Law ranking under the administration continues to plummet. So I read that, no? Dito ko na nga nakita yung research. Okay. So ngayon, bumabagsak na tayo daw. Nakaka-depress. Naisip ko, nakaka-depress naman to. Anong pwede natin gawin? Meron kasing iba, gripe ka na lang ng gripe eh. Sasalita ka na lang, may mga kasalanan ng gobyerno. You know what? Sa totoo lang, we're partly at fault eh. We're partly at fault. Why? Because we allow things to happen. And so therefore, it's about time that we raise our voices and engage. So as parents and educator, what can we do to enforce the rule of law? So I want us to move forward. In a sense, we already know the patterns going down. How do we move up? We move forward. But we, this is not to say that we allow what happened before, like the issues of EJK and corruption, to be put in the back burner. No, let them be held accountable, because that's the essence of democracy, holding people accountable for the consequences of their actions. But then again, it is not enough that we gripe. We have to do something. We have to act. So we move forward. We do baby steps. Sabi ko nga ganyan, if we do it little by little on our own, probably we will be able to do something. Work out little ripples, then move forward. What do? We first talk about things. We talk about the truth to power. We discuss. We allow free, opinions, people to say their opinions freely, and then we engage. How do we do that? When I was younger kasi, in our family, and my dad is watching us, our family, when we have dinner or when we have, lunch, it becomes a forum. We talk about current issues. And they tell us what is, not necessary, like, what is your opinion? What do you think? Is this right? Is this wrong? So we engage, we discuss, we talk. It need not be like meron kang mga research papers, hindi eh. Kwentuhan lang. Or in a sense, no, they were talking, my parents were talking about martial law. What was it, what it was before. And what was happening at our time kasi, that was the people power movement. I was in the College of Poli-Sci then from 1982 to 86. So that was a very good time to study political science because history was happening right right at that moment. So we were engaging. We were doing something about it. Now, in classrooms, I had a teacher once who would ask us, and I remember that we called it social studies. Pangalan pa ng subject namin, ngayon yata parang HECASI or something, no? Pero yung social studies namin, yung teacher ko would require us, one of us, to go to the front and discuss, take up a newspaper item and discuss about it. That happened every day. And then we discuss for about 10-15 minutes. You know? Merong iba-ibang viewpoints, pero pinag-uusapan namin o ano yung pinakamagandang mangyari dito. And then, ang pinaka-importante, kung ikaw yung nagtuturo, bawa ako bilang guro, whatever I say, I mean. I walk the talk and I talk the walk. Kasi what's the point? May sasabihin ako, hindi ko naman pala gagawin. Diba? So, what are the little simple things that we can do, especially as teachers, no? And then, our students will emulate us, or at least we talk about it too, no? And when we talk about it, and then they follow us, no? We follow the rules. First, we follow the rules. We teach them how to follow the rules. We show them how to follow the rules by your own personal life. Okay? So, unang-una, yung wearing mask and shield. Ngayon pa lang, nakikita natin. We're supposed to be wearing mask and shield, but you see people there outside, nakamask ka, nandito naman yung mask. Bale, wala. Yung ilong nakalabas. Di ba? Or meron siyang shield, pero nakataas. Bale, wala rin. Or social distancing. It is already required because it is a public health problem. So therefore, at least, you want to protect not just yourself, but you want to protect the others. So you have to observe social distancing. Now, ito na lang, yung traffic lights. Marami kang nakikita, I'm sure. Pagka walang police, go through the traffic light kahit pula. Or, nagpupula na, bibilisan niya lalo. Kaya maraming nababangga. Or kahit lang sa SM, naghihintay ka. Di ba? Naghihintay ka, ang haba-haba ng linya, may makikita ka nagka-cut sa harap. Hindi ba nakakainis, nakakabwisit? So, if we do our own part, by doing these little things, I think we're already putting order, little by little in society. We show people to follow the rules, and we demand that other people follow the rules too. Let us be socially responsible. We have to be mindful of others. Now, one good example, community pantry. Kita nyo na lang, bigla na lang umusbong yan, and I'm so happy. There is still hope. I am still very hopeful as well, together with Dean Tony and Father IJ. The fact that there was community pantry that came out during the real dark times of the pandemic in the middle of the ECQ, napakalaking bagay po. It gives me hope. This is also like parang bumabalik yung bayanihan spirit at saka yung kapit-bisig. Sana man lang we really push for these, Filipino traits and values. We support local industries, we buy Filipino. Ito mga to, naisulat na to . I remember there was a book dati . I even bought one . It was like 12 things that you can do for your country, 12 things that a Filipino can do for the Philippines, parang ganyan. So, let's just do this. Instead of importing, getting PX goods, let's buy from the Filipino farmers. Let's also buy from those in need. Be environmentally conscious. Do not throw the trash improperly. Simpleng-simple lang yan, di ba? Segregation. Try to recycle. We try to conserve water and energy. And then, I think this is very important, and this is something that we have to drive to our students. We have to respect and protect other people's rights. So, the essence, ako, kahit ayaw ko yung sinasabi ng isang tao, nagkataon pa kaibigan ko, respeto. Bakit? Yun ang paniniwala niya. No? So you also respect the political beliefs of others, even if it is contrary to yours. But just because they are contrary to yours, it doesn't mean you jail them. Diba? That is the essence of democracy. You allow them to speak their mind. Vote during elections. Importante. I think Dean Tony emphasized this na. And I cannot overemphasize. We have to vote wisely during every election. So you start with registration. So yung mga hindi pa nagre-register, yung mga anak ninyo, i-register nyo, isamahan ninyo na mag-register. Tell your kids why it's important to vote. You want to change you want to change how things are run? Do something about it. Do something concrete. One way, vote. Do not let them buy your vote. Vote according to your conscience. Protect and preserve the sanctity of the vote and the elections. And lastly, and ang dami pa nito, pero ito lang yung mga naisip ko, no, kaninang umaga. Be a servant leader. Do not demand of others what you cannot do yourself. And if you're a boss, give what is due to your own employees. No? So whatever you do it with honor and excellence. Do it for God and country. Sabi ni Father Attorney IJ, mahirap magbuo ng bayan. Totoo. Lalo na kung wala kang pagmamahal. Pero ang paniniwala ko, lahat tayo mahal natin ng bayan. Mahirap lang minsan mahalin. Pero anong gagawin natin? Simulan natin ngayon ulit paano bumangon ang bayan. Maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat, Dean Ada, Father IJ, and of course, Dean Viña. So marami ng katanungan, no? Gusto ko lang mag-umpisa dito kasi medyo masyado ako naantig sa mga sinabi ni Father IJ at ni Dean Ada. I was reminded of the song, no? Mahalin mo ang Pilipinas ng higit sa iyong sarili. Parang
Kantahin mo nga, Do.
Parang ideal natin yon, no? Sana. So,
Kantahin mo, Do.
having said that, Dean, at hindi kita inutusan, ikaw talaga inutusan. I'd like to say first that there's a video recording of this forum, and we are uploading this in our site, and schools actually use it in their classrooms, in their faculty development activities. So lahat ng bumabati sa Facebook ngayon are saying that this has been a very, very good discussion and giving them a lot of directions. Pero pick up ko yung kay Dean Viña, but I want everyone to answer. Very mind-boggling and disturbing at that. Dynastic control. Okay, parang papunta tayo sa political dynasties, or we're already there. And we all know that this is all violative, no, of the universal principles of the rule of law. So thank you, Dean Ada, no, for talking about the World Justice Project, our continuous decline, no, in our ranking there. So ano ang pananaw nyo rito, Dean Viña? The majority can be mistaken. Tama ba?
Well, on dynasties for sure, because ano na yan, I mean, well settled na siya na dynasties are bad for the country, no. Nasettle na yan actually ng Constitutional Commission, di ba, sa 1987. Talaga namang binawal nila. Kaya lang problema nila, they left it to Congress to come up with the rules, no. Yun ang mistake nung ano. So I think when we have the chance to do it again, we have to do that. I mean, kasi it really is insidious siya yung ano. And it's not personal, kasi alam mo, Doris, because I mentor a lot and I teach a lot and I work a lot with politicians. I mean, there are good people from families. I mean, hindi ko sinasabi lahat ng politika na galing sa isang pamilya ay masama. I mean, then we'd be also contradicting ourselves, diba? If we like President Aquino or VP Robredo, or I mean, they do come from that context naman. But what's wrong is you may birthright, diba? You may birthright ka sa posisyon, diba? It becomes a family. It becomes a family business. I mean, so I think ano yon, in fact, ngayon nasa, diba, it started muna yan na mga congressman, local governor, and then we started having siblings and father and children in the Senate, and now we're gonna possibly have diba, father in the presidency, no? So parang I think it's time to put our foot down as a people. Pamadugong kampanya yan kasi educational siya, hindi siya, diba, it has to be explain why hindi siya tama na gano'n.
Thank you. Dean Tony, Father IJ, Dean Ada. Your comments on this?
Ako, just briefly, Ma'am Doris, in a way, ako personally, because I agree with Dean Tony, there are a lot of good politicians. Unfortunately, they would come from same families. My own take talaga is that dynasty itself is two-edged, double-edged, but it can be solved sana if we have a more mature party system. Because if you have a mature party system, then it does not become personality-based or family-based. So it becomes principle and belief-based. No? So, kasi there are also some areas that unfortunately for the son, but the son is able to carry on the father's good legacy. But of course, many times they're just exception to the rule. It becomes, as Dean Tony said, it's a birthright, and that's the difficulty of it. We don't go to issues or achievements. Instead, you go to family names. And I think culturally kasi as a people, yun din yung konting immaturity natin. We're so attached to persons rather than you don't go to, when you go for campaigns, you don't go issues or platform. You go who are the celebrities or who gets to shake more hands. That's the painful part of it, the immaturity of our. But again, if we have, kay Dean Tony, if a party system also na din, would be strong enough, I would say that it would really curb a lot of problems in terms of our elections as a democratic practice and institution.
Doris, that's very good, no? I mean, kasi tinan mo naman yung Singapore, for example, di ba, we had but nobody will ever say na yung anak ni Prime Minister Lee became, di ba, Prime Minister because of the father, di ba? Because it was a party decision and he had proven himself also within the party. I think very important yung ano na. And that's a possible solution, no? That sa totoo lang, mahirap din yung absolute ban na lang from anyone to run, di ba? Kasi parang that's also antithetical to democracy from ano, di ba? So the other solution, the more effective solution might actually be to for example, hindi party system. And a party system means hindi ka direct voting ng mga tao, but you vote a party, di ba? So we have that interesting experiment right now in the Bangsamoro, di ba? Kasi parliamentary system sila, 50% of the seats are reserved for political parties. Baka hindi sa Pilipinas kasi ang tanong ko actually is what is more culturally, di ba, strange for the Filipino, di ba, na to vote for a party instead of an individual, or to vote for a family or not for a family. Parang both are parang culturally ingrained na kailangan mo siyang harapin, di ba?
Dean Tony,
Dean Ada.
may tanong lang ako. Di ba meron dating final na bill on anti-dynasty? What happened to that na? Kasi hindi ako constitutional law expert eh.
Hindi siya umuobra even at the
Kaya nga. Wild idea lang kasi. Kung talagang gusto ng mga tao, no? you can even, if it were possible, he is a devil's advocate. Eh di kahit magagaling yung nasa pamilya, delikadesa na lang para walang masabi na hindi muna siya mag-run after yung halimbawa nung asawa niya or yung kapatid niya. 'Di ba?
Yeah.
Parang delikadesa na lang para lang walang masabi yung mga tao about possible may tinatago na skeletons in the closet, etc., etc. But there is actually no law against it eh. That's the reason why this happens. And yes, you are correct. There are lots of families where ang magagaling naman talaga yung, kilala kasi, nakikilala, so magaling. Pero sana man talaga yung mga talagang nandun sa pamilya yon talagang pumukpok naman. But then again, there's already an advantage because the name is already known, no? Well known na. And they could make use of the reputation, not only the reputation, but also the resources of the previous administration where, the parent or the sister or, the husband was. So kung may delikadesa siguro, pwede namang sabihin nila wag na lang. Wishful thinking.
Dati na pag-usapan yan, I think, no, nung nasa advocacy commission tayo, I think people's initiative. Kasi kung hindi siya dadalahin ng Kongreso, ang anti-dynasty law, baka pwedeng ganon ang maging route.
Ano naman, isang problema naman, as I said in my talk, we foreclose the possibility of using the initiative and referendum by being very strict about it. Yung combination ng the kind of law Congress passed for it and then the Supreme Court interpretation. It's kind of absurd for me. I mean, naintindihan ko they wanted to stop Arroyo, so that's okay with me. But the interpretation hindi ganyan sa other parts of the world. It's other parts of the world. Sa supermarket ka lang, mag-sign ka lang ng petition,
Yes.
tama na yun, di ba? There's no need for all of this kind of very detailed, very strict to use. Otherwise, talagang hindi mo magagamit yung importante naman sa referendum and is that yung sa referendum, di ba? Do people like the law or not, di ba? Will it win or not? I don't think it matters very much how it was generated and the petition itself, di ba? Dapat nga yung of course sa Constitutional Commission din yun na may mga 3%, 7% pa sila, mga iba-ibang percentages pa. Dapat siguro 500,000 people all over the country, enough na yon, di ba? To start the process, parang ganon. So if you really want participation.
Funny nga eh. That was the topic of our thesis ni Ging Ursua. That was in 1990, ha? And 1990, 2021 na, wala pa nangyayari.
No,
diba?
I'm
was.
actually embarrassed kasi nagkampanya ako for the 1987 Constitution and we were always telling people, iboto nyo kasi you can now be a legislator. Lahat tayo pwede na mag-congressman, lahat tayo pwede na mag-propose ng Constitution.
Nobody tried.
The Supreme Court and the Congress just foreclosed the possibility.
Well, they tried, but then because,
Pero may tanong tayo dito, siguro teacher ito, no? Si Leonel Casimiro. Sabi niya, what is the most powerful tool to educate the youth at this time that will very well explain all of these issues in the Constitution, the crimes against humanity, and then idagdag ko, strengthening the rule of law? Ano daw ang pwedeng gamitin na tool?
Social media, but
TikTok?
is the most effective, I think, in my experience. But you have to be very creative to be able to do that, no. But I have to say, and sa administrators dito, I will direct this to all the administrators, di ba? Encouraging, di ba, activism, encouraging students to express themselves, di ba? Kahit mali sila, di ba? Is really the best, to be honest, di ba? Medyo uncomfortable kasi pwede i-direct sa'yo yun, di ba? If they disagree with you. I have been administrator, 10 years din ako and more, and well, even now I'm an administrator, although hindi naman siya education, research siya, yung Manila Observatory, but I was 9 years. It's uncomfortable na when you're criticized, diba? Especially if you think you did your job naman and everyone, yung ganun. But actually, it's the best talaga sa experience ko. Yung ano, in my own personal experience is that I grew as a citizen when I was able to question things in my school, in my community, diba? With powerful people. It's a very empowering. I see that kasi I always tell them, diba, I lawyer for all of the student activists. I always say, you don't have a blank check from me on your issues, diba? Because we could disagree and it's okay. Kasi I write a lot. So maaring yung inaatake nyo, sinusuportahan ko, diba? Or yung but, diba? I will always defend your right to say what you want to say, diba? As long as it's peaceful, diba? As long as it's not hateful. May limits din ganon. But importante yon kasi that's really the best way for sa educational system to get people to even in class, diba? People to raise the questions are really the most important things to how to learn more than anything else, I think.
Attorney Ada, you wanna add anything?
Well,
Attorney-
yung tungkol dyan sa freedom of yung opinions of others, no, as even if it were contrary to yours, I said earlier, the essence of democracy is just, allowing them to speak freely. And, yes, criticisms may hurt, but then again, sometimes it is in the discussions where you find the most equitable solutions. You try to find out where they're coming from rather than, dictate what you want. Whenever you dictate what you want, and it appears it's not equitable for all, it's not good for all pala, mali din pala ako. It happens to me a lot of times, even in our law office. Ultimong pati yung kung saan kami magsa-summer outing hindi ko pwede i-dictate. Bakit? Kahit ayoko lang Korea, gusto nila mag-Korea dahil nanonood sila Korea telenovela. O di, akin lang, in the discussion, you let them find out what they want, and then everybody becomes happy. Eventually.
Okay, Father IJ, gusto mong magpaalam sa lahat kung ikaw ay kailangan ng umalis?
Sorry, kailangan kong umalis. Ako ay nakatokang magmisa ng alas 12 ngayon dito.
Oh,
Maraming salamat, Doris. Din Tony, din Ada, thank you so much.
thank you, Father IJ. Pagdasal mo kami.
Opo, thank you everyone at keep safe.
Thank you.
Thank you, Father RJ. Anyway, malapit na rin tayong matapos, no? Pero one last question para naman si Chris Mayweather. Sana pangalan niya talaga ito. May tanong siya. Aside from the peace talks, if you were in the president's shoes, what do you think is the best strategy to put an end to CPP-NPA and its legal fronts in Congress? Gusto kong sagutin ninyo ito. Dahil kanina pinag-uusapan natin ng red tagging, no, ng NTF-ELCA.
Kasi siyempre sabi, aside from peace talks, which is a fair thing, because that's really a permanent political settlement with all armed forces, diba, non-state armed forces. It's really the best. Yan naman, that's the only thing that succeeds in the world. No? I mean, we've seen that. But aside from that, it's really addressing the roots of social conflict, diba? Regardless of whether there's someone fighting for it or not, we should just do the right thing in terms of social justice, in terms of social inequality. I have a lesson from that in my work with President Fidel V. Ramos when I was undersecretary. I was very young, undersecretary, may energy pa ako to travel everywhere, to fix problems. I mean, and the way President Ramos assigned me for the peace talks was, hanapin mo lahat ng mga environmental issues na nire-raise ng NPA, ng NDF, ng CPP, at isolve mo. Diba? Regardless of whether they demand it or not. So that when we sit down with them, we tell them, wala na kayong pinag-aawayan, at least sa issues na yon. Hindi nyo na kailangan kalabanin kami doon kasi na-solve na namin. Diba? So I think that's that's really the best way. And then I want to address the fronts part, diba? Because that is false. That is fake news. I have worked with Makabayan for many years, and especially in the last 4 years, 5 years. They're very good legislators, Doris. I mean, of course they have radical positions because that's what they bring, di ba? They have militant, but they're very good. Ang galing nila mag-antindi ng budget, mag-interpolate. You cannot ask for more than that from any legislator, di ba? They follow the rules. They have mastered the rules. So actually, what I would want is to have more of them by a proportional system of ano. Ang problema ng ating party list kasi, it's also not a very good party list system because constitutionally, ano yan ang di ba ang problema ng party list natin, originally, in-envision talaga buong parliament, in-envision niya na parliament, hindi Congress. Unicameral lang. And then everything was going to be party list, di ba? Wala nang boto-boto. Ito lang visionary yung mga ano natin mga concom natin na nag-draft niyan. Wala nang boto-boto ng individual. So it would have solved your family problem. You just vote for your political party. And then in proportion, yun ang number of people, di ba? So if you got 20% of the vote, you will get 20% of the Congress. If you got 50%, you'll get 50%. Like many other countries, with a few deviations here and there. Walang winner take all, di ba, per district, but it's political parties all over the country that will so you have a political party system. So kung ganun halimbawa, yung mga tinatawag nilang Makabayan, for example, they will not get the majority, but they will get 15 to 20% because that's their voting strength, di ba? So you will have 50 or 60 of them. God bless the Philippines if you have 60 Makabayan legislators who really do their homework, di ba? I'm sure there will also be 50 or 60 people na mas business-oriented, maybe 100 people. Di ba yung ganon? Maganda yung Pilipinas na maraming interest dala-dala sa Congress. So we resolve everything in the Congress, di ba? And not outside it. Yun lang yung aking sagot doon.
Yeah, kaya nga gusto ko talagang sagutin yun kasi nga, yung mali yun yung thinking na legal fronts in Congress.
No, I will just vouch for every single one of them. Diba? The current one and the previous one. You will just vouch for every single of them na they're very good legislators, very respectful of process. Diba? Now again, I will not support all their positions. Hindi naman ako member ng partido nila, diba? Na mga, I will not vouch for that kasi syempre, they are all definitely progressive, left, but it's okay. It's actually good to have that in Congress, a view like that in Congress.
Correct. Dean Ada, you
So
want
Doris, you were asking earlier yung red tagging, di ba? Like you were red tagged just because you had a particular belief or in a particular issue, you sided with some, with a radical in a particular issue. Now, ako kasi ang thinking ko simple lang Now, lahat tayo kasi, I would like to believe that all of us, regardless of political ideologies and beliefs, just want to have a better future for our country, for the future of our own children. It's in the manner lang of how do we get there? That's different. Now, the political beliefs is just, an assertion of this is the way I want things to happen so that we can have this better future. Now, what's wrong with that, di ba? If sabihin ko, I'm middle of the road or, like I'm centrist, there's leftists, there's right. Hindi naman lahat ng issue, lagi ka nasa kaliwa o nasa kanan May maraming issue yan na paiba-iba, But in any event, akin lang, for as long as you voice out, that's your belief, then I will respect it. What I just don't want is a violence, that you engage in violence in order that you get what you want. That's a no-no to me. That's non-negotiable. Yep. But yung red tagging, I think that's very unfair. Honestly, kasi just because I said something that was not, in consonance with the general perception, red na ako. I mean, although naka-red ako ngayon, but
Correct,
this is
yeah.
actually maroon. No?
Yeah.
This is
Or kung
maroon.
naka-red ka, mare-red tag ka.
Maroon ako eh. Ha? UP yan. Anyway, so ang akin lang,
Very good points, yes.
it's not an issue to me. I have a lot of friends from both sides. And I relish listening to them. Why? Because it's from them that I learn what's the best solution. What's the best and equitable solution for everyone. You just try to, strike the right balance. Yun lang.
Okay, so dahil kailangan na natin itong i-conclude, probably I'll give each one of you a chance, no? One thought, one insight na sa tingin ninyo, gusto ninyo na yun talaga yung kung lahat makalimutan, yun ang wag nilang makalimutan in this forum.
Vote wisely. The stakes are very high. The stakes are very high in 2022. Lalo na kung kabataan ka. If you are in your 20s, late teens, early 30s, wow. Those of us, pwede na kami. I'm a little bit older naman than Ada. I want to say that Ada is same age as me. I don't actually know. Parang you're a generation younger, Doris. But parang we can, di ba? Para namang, ako sometimes I actually just want to retire and di akong pakialam, di ba? I can just teach. Sa totoo lang, I like to teach and I teach a lot. Scaled up on teaching ko. It makes me very happy. Just, that and I don't really have to do anything else anymore except that. Parang ang dami naman gusto mag-hire sa akin na magturo. So pwede naman siya, di ba? Pero I think we still have to engage because this is in this election is probably the most crucial I think the nearest thing to it is the 1986 elections, Marcos versus Aquino, Cory Aquino. I think what will happen in 2022 will determine what happens to this country in the next 20 years.
I agree 100%. At talagang hindi na natin kailangan i-hire si Dean Laviña para magturo. Eto na. Okay, para sa lahat ng mga teachers at eskwelahan, you can listen to him in this forum. Dean Ada.
Last words ba?
Yes. Hindi ka
Alam mo,
makakatulog pag hindi mo to sinabi.
Ito kasi, nabagabag yung kalooban ko nung narinig ko yung sinabi ni Father Attorney IJ nga. Sabi niya, mahirap magbuo ng bayan. Mahirap magbuo ng bayan. Inisip ko tuloy, sabi niya kasi baka kulang sa pagmamahal. Kung hindi, paano mo mamahalin, di ba? Dapat punuan mo, lagyan mo rin. You have to do something to make it work. You have to you have to participate in order that you will learn to love it, no? So if you did not contribute to this, then wala ka halos pagmamahal. Anong klaseng relasyon 'yan, di ba? In terms of even a personal relationship, if you don't put your 100% effort into it, what kind of a relationship is that? So ang akin lang, kung wala tayong pagmamahal sa bayan natin, siguro hindi kasi ikaw nagpundar ng effort mo, towards making that the Philippines better. So, kung pinaghirapan mo yung pagpapagawa ng sosyedad ng Pilipinas, mamahalin mo yan. So, you try to do something now. You say you don't love the country. You want to love the country because this is the only country that you have. So, do something about it. You contribute to the country. Just don't sit down. You have to engage. Vote wisely.
Salamat din, Ada. Parang hindi rin umalis si Father IJ dun sa naisabit natin siya.
Oh.
So maraming salamat ulit, Dean Laviña, Dean Ada Abad, and Father IJ for this morning's leader. Tomorrow, we have Professor Dindo Manhit and Father Danny Pilario to talk about the Filipino psyche, no, and the common good, no. Yun na nga yung pinag-uusapan kanina, and Father IJ gave a lot of insights on that. So we'd like to invite everyone to that forum tomorrow as a continuation of our Educating for Social Transformation in the 21st Century. And we'd like to thank those who cross-posted this morning's forum. We have the Coordinating Council of Private Educational Association, or COCOPEA. We have CAP, the Catholic Educational Association of the Philippines, and the Philippine Association of Colleges and Universities, that's PACU. And we have Inteligente Publishing, who is also cross-posting in order for us to reach as many of our schools teachers and even our public school teachers. And we also would like to acknowledge, of course, the National Secretariat of the PAC, together with the TDU, ITIM unit, CRU, and Finance. We have Presi Labao, Butch Everola, Terence Barrido, Red Gallego, May de Malanta. Thank you for all the work and for conceptualizing LIDER. The next LIDER happens, well, tomorrow. But in January, Din Tony, sabi mo nga, maaga natin itong inumpisahan, tutuloy-tuloy natin ito. We need all of these discussions because we all realize that, sabi nga kanina, no, activism, parang hindi talaga sa bahay yan eh. Ang eskwelahan, ang very critical na institution for us to be able to really teach and form our students in order for them to really engage, to be able to like, pangatawan na, no? Sabi nga, Din Ada, kailangan mag-invest sila sa ating bayan para because of all of that investment, talagang mamahalin nila ang ating bayang Pilipinas. So on that, we'd like to thank everyone. Magandang hapon sa inyong lahat and see you all tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.